The key in my hand was cold. Colder than the February morning biting at my ears. Colder than the concrete steps beneath my feet. It was a standard issue state key, brassy and worn thin by years of hands that had held it before mine, attached to a flimsy plastic tag with my name printed in faded ink. Cordelia Ashford, Unit 7, Bed B. That number had been my entire identity for 3 years. My address when caseworkers needed to find me. My file number when judges reviewed my case. My place in a system that counted heads every night but rarely bothered to see faces. Today that number was officially expired. I stood on the cracked concrete steps of the Clearview group home, holding a single black trash bag that contained everything I owned. 3 changes of clothes, most of them too small now, because nobody had thought to check if I had outgrown them. A worn paperback copy of Little Women that I had read so many times the spine had surrendered years ago, pages threatening to scatter like leaves if I opened it too roughly. And a photograph of my mother, faded and soft at the edges from being held too often, studied too closely, as if staring at her face might somehow bring her back. The sky above me was the color of dishwater, low and heavy, threatening a snow that could not quite commit to falling. The air smelled like exhaust from the highway half a mile away and the metallic tang of frozen earth. For a long moment, I did not move. I just stood there on those steps, one foot still technically inside the world I had known, and listened. For 3 years, every second of my life had been filled with noise. The television blaring game shows in the common room because nobody could agree on what to watch, so whoever got there first controlled the remote until someone bigger took it away. The shouting matches that erupted in the hallway over stolen snacks or borrowed clothes never returned, or looks that were interpreted as disrespect. The quiet, desperate sobbing that sometimes leaked through the thin walls at night, when the younger kids thought nobody could hear them crying for mothers who were gone, or fathers who had never existed, or lives that had been stolen before they even had a chance to begin. Now there was only silence, the distant hum of traffic on the interstate, the rustle of dead leaves skittering across the frozen lawn like small brown ghosts fleeing some unseen catastrophe. I was 18 years old, legally an adult, free. Freedom was supposed to feel big, expansive, like stepping out of a cage and into an open sky, lungs filling with possibility, heart swelling with hope. It just felt empty. My sister Margot was still inside that building, 15 years old, 3 more years left on her sentence, as we had taken to calling it. 3 more years of Unit 7, of counted heads and lights out at 9, of caseworkers who meant well, but were stretched so thin they sometimes called her by other girls' names. I had said goodbye to her in the hallway 20 minutes ago. A clumsy, rushed embrace under the watchful eye of Mr. Davies, the floor supervisor, who had given us exactly 2 minutes and not a second more. Rules were rules. Schedules were schedules. The fact that I was leaving my only family behind did not warrant any special consideration. Margot's arms had wrapped around me so tight I could feel her heartbeat through her thin sweater, rapid and frightened like a small bird trapped against glass. She was small for 15, always had been. The doctors said it was from the years of instability before we ended up in the system. Malnutrition leaves marks that do not always show on the surface. Sometimes the damage hides in bones that never quite reach their full length, in immune systems that struggle against every cold, and heights that plateau years before they should. She had pulled back and looked at me with those big gray eyes, our mother's eyes, trying so hard to be brave, trying so hard not to cry because she knew if she started, she would not stop, and she could not afford to fall apart. Not here, not in front of Mr. Davies, who would write it down in her file as evidence of emotional instability. "You will be fine, Cora," she had said, using the nickname only she was allowed to use, the name our mother had called me when I was very small, before everything went wrong. "You will figure it out. You always do." I had wanted to tell her so many things, that I would come back for her, that I would find a way to get her out of this place, that we would be together again, somehow, somewhere, in a home that belonged to us. But Mr. Davies had cleared his throat, and the moment was over. Now I stood alone on the steps with a trash bag containing everything I owned and $87 in my pocket. the sum total of my state-mandated savings from 3 years of odd jobs. Washing dishes at the diner down the street for a manager who paid cash and asked no questions. Babysitting for a caseworker who needed weekend help and preferred not to go through official channels. Tutoring younger kids in math because numbers made sense to me in a way that people often did not. $87. A bus ticket to a city I had never been to. The name of a shelter that was probably already full because shelters in February were always full. That was the plan. Such as it was. Survive. Keep breathing. Figure out the rest later. It was the same plan I had been following since I was 12 years old, since the night the police knocked on our apartment door with their hats in their hands and told us our mother was gone and there was nobody left to take us in. I took a step forward, then another. The trash bag crinkled against my leg with each movement, the plastic already starting to stretch at the seams from the sharp corners of my paperback pressing against it. The plan did not last 10 minutes. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. It was a cheap prepaid thing I had bought a week ago, just in case someone needed to reach me, though I could not imagine who that would be. The screen showed an unknown number with an area code I did not recognize. I almost ignored it. Probably a wrong number, or worse, someone from the home telling me I had forgotten to sign some form, that I needed to come back and dot one more I before they would truly let me go. But something made me answer. Some instinct I could not name. Hello? Is this Cordelia Ashford? A woman's voice, crisp and professional, with the careful pronunciation of someone who spent a lot of time on the phone, delivering news that would change people's lives. Not unkind, but not warm either. The voice of someone who had learned to keep her emotions at a professional distance. Yes. Who is this? My name is Judith Pennington. I am an attorney with the state's Office of Public Guardianship. I was assigned to your grandmother's case. I stopped walking. My feet simply refused to move forward, as if they understood before my brain did that whatever came next would change everything. My grandmother. The word landed strange in my mind, like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples out in every direction. I barely remembered her. A vague image from early childhood, soft and unfocused at the edges, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Flour on her weathered hands as she kneaded dough. A garden full of strange-smelling herbs that she grew in clay pots on a wooden porch that creaked when you walked across it. The smell of something sweet baking in an oven, filling a small kitchen with warmth. We had not seen her since I was 8 years old, maybe 9. A few years before our mother got really sick, before the coughing that never stopped, before the hospital visits that grew longer each time, before everything fell apart completely. Mom never wanted to talk about her. The few times I had asked, her face would close up like a door slamming shut, and she would change the subject with a firmness that made it clear the conversation was over. Whatever had happened between them, whatever had driven them apart, was a wound too deep to examine. My grandmother, I said, my voice sounding hollow and strange in my own ears, like it belonged to someone else. I am sorry to have to tell you this over the phone, Cordelia. Ms. Pennington's tone softened just a fraction, the way professionals do when they are about to deliver bad news. When they know the words they are about to speak will leave marks. But she passed away 2 weeks ago. The world tilted slightly. The gray sky seemed to press down harder, as if it were trying to push me into the frozen earth. 2 weeks ago, my grandmother had been dead for 2 weeks, and I had not known. Had not felt anything different in the universe. Had not sensed her passing, had not even known enough about her to know she was still alive until this moment when I learned she was not. A death I had not even known to prepare for. A person who had been a ghost in my memory was now a real ghost. Someone I might have had the chance to know, to ask questions of, to understand why she and my mother had stopped speaking. That chance was gone now. It had been gone for 2 weeks, and I had been scrubbing dishes and counting days until my release, completely unaware that a door I had not even known existed had closed forever. Oh, it was all I could manage. I understand this is a lot to take in, especially today, Ms. Pennington continued, and I wondered how she knew what today was. But of course she knew. She had my file. She knew everything about me that could be reduced to paper in official records. She knew my birth date and my release date and every placement I had been shuffled through since entering the system. The reason I am calling is that you are listed as her heir. You and your sister, Margot. I laughed. It came out short and bitter, more like a cough or a bark than anything resembling amusement. The cold air turned it into a small white cloud that dissipated almost instantly, as if even my breath was impermanent. Heir? We do not. She did not have anything. We were told she lived in a trailer park somewhere in Montana. That she had nothing. That is not entirely accurate. Ms. Pennington's voice was careful now, measured, choosing each word with precision. She owned a small property, a house and 5 acres of land in a town called Havenwood. According to her will, it passes to you and your sister jointly. But since you are now of legal age, you are listed as the primary executor. A house, land, 5 acres. The words did not compute. They were concepts from a different universe, a different life. Things that happened to other people. People who had families and safety nets and futures that extended beyond next week, like luxury cars or summer vacations or college funds. Things I had seen on television but never expected to touch. People like me did not inherit houses. There is a complication, Cordelia, Miss Pennington added, and there it was. The other shoe, the one that always dropped, no matter how briefly hope had flickered. I had learned that lesson early. Whenever something seemed too good to be true, it was because the catch was still hiding around the corner. Your grandmother fell behind on property taxes for the last several years. The county has placed a lien on the property. You have 90 days to pay the delinquent amount, or they will seize it and auction it off. Of course, there it was. A dream dangled for a single moment, then snatched away before I could even close my fingers around it. How much? $14,622. I leaned against a chain-link fence at the edge of the group home's property. The cold metal bit into my back through my thin jacket, hard and real and grounding. $14,000. I might as well have needed 14 million. I might as well have needed the moon wrapped in a bow and delivered to my doorstep. So it is gone, I said flatly. There is nothing I can do. Not necessarily. Ms. Pennington paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted. Less professional, more human. I have been looking at the file, Cordelia. The property is isolated. The house is listed as being in extreme disrepair. It is unlikely to fetch much at auction. Maybe just enough to cover the taxes, but the land itself might have some value down the line. She paused again, longer this time. I am not supposed to give you advice. That is not my role here, but your options are limited right now. You could walk away and let the county take it. Or you could go there. You have 90 days of legal occupancy, 90 days to figure out if there is anything worth saving. It is not a shelter in the city, but it is a roof, technically, a roof, a broken roof on a ruined house in the middle of nowhere, saddled with a debt I could never pay, left to me by a grandmother I barely remembered and had never understood. It was the worst offer I had ever heard. It was also the best offer I had ever had. Where is it? I asked. 2 bus rides and a 12-mile taxi trip later, I understood what Ms. Pennington had meant by isolated. The first bus took me out of the city, past the sprawling suburbs with their identical houses and their identical lawns, past the strip malls and the big box stores, past everything familiar and into countryside I had never seen. The second bus wound through small towns that got progressively smaller, their main streets shrinking from 4 blocks to 2 blocks to barely 1. By the time I got off at the Greyhound station in Millbrook, Montana, the sun was setting and the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. The station was a single room attached to a gas station, staffed by a woman who barely looked up from her magazine when I asked about getting to Havenwood. No bus goes there, honey, she said, turning a page with long fingernails painted a chipped red. You will need to call Eddie. Eddie turned out to be a taxi driver with a kind, weathered face and a pickup truck that had seen better decades. The cab smelled like coffee and sawdust, and the heater made a sound like an asthmatic cat, but it pumped out enough warmth that I stopped shivering by the time we hit the highway. Havenwood, Eddie said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he spoke. Have not had a fare out there in months. What takes you to that part of the world? I inherited some land there. It felt strange to say it out loud, like trying on clothes that did not fit, wearing someone else's life. Eddie nodded slowly. From the Ashford place? Old Rosemary's property. You knew her. Everybody knew Rosemary. His voice was warm with memory. She kept to herself mostly, especially toward the end. But she was a good woman. Stubborn as a mule, but good. Sorry for your loss. I did not know what to say to that. Thank you felt wrong when I had barely known her. I settled for a nod. The drive took nearly an hour, winding through hills that grew steeper and roads that grew narrower. The last 20 minutes were on a dirt road that was more suggestion than path, the truck bouncing over frozen ruts, while bare trees crowded in on either side like skeletal sentinels standing watch. Finally, Eddie stopped at the end of a track that disappeared up a gentle slope into dense woods. This is it, he said, pointing. The old Ashford place. Nobody has lived up there in years. He looked at me, at my trash bag and my thin jacket and my city shoes that were already soaked through from the snow that had started falling somewhere around Millbrook. A flicker of something crossed his weathered face. Concern, maybe, or pity. The look people give stray dogs they cannot take home. He hesitated. Then he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small foil-wrapped bundle. Here, he said, pushing it into my hand. My wife's banana bread. You look like you could use it. I mumbled a thank you, my throat too tight to say more. He just nodded, the way people do when words are not really necessary. Then he drove away, and I was alone. The taillights disappeared around a bend, red blinking out into darkness, and the silence closed in like water filling a glass. No traffic, no sirens, no television or shouting or crying through thin walls, just the wind in the bare trees and the soft whisper of snow falling. I started walking. The property was not just in disrepair. It was being actively reclaimed by nature, pulled back into the earth inch by inch. The dirt road that led up to the house was choked with weeds, even in winter. Young saplings grew defiantly in the middle of the track, their bare branches reaching up toward the gray sky. As I climbed the slope, the woods on either side grew thicker, pressing in until the path was barely wide enough for one person. Then I saw it. The house stood in a small clearing at the top of the hill. It was a small one-story clapboard structure, the kind you see in old photographs of the American frontier. It had been white once, maybe a long time ago. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood a silvery, splintered gray that seemed to glow faintly in the dying light. The porch roof sagged at a drunken angle, held up by one last stubborn post that looked like it might surrender at any moment. A shutter hung from a single hinge, banging softly in the breeze like a door that nobody had remembered to close. Some of the windows were dark and empty, their glass long since shattered by storms or stones, or simply time. Others had been boarded up with plywood that had warped and split over the years. The front steps were missing their middle board entirely, leaving a gap like a knocked-out tooth. It was the saddest place I had ever seen. My heart, which had been slowly climbing towards something like hope over the past few hours, sank back down into my shoes. This was a mistake, a cruel joke. There was no roof here, not a safe one, not one that would keep out the cold or the rain or the crushing weight of $14,000 in debt. I pushed open the front door anyway. It groaned in protest, the hinges screaming rust and neglect. The air inside was thick and musty, heavy with the smell of damp and decay and forgotten things. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through grimy windows. The floor was littered with debris, fallen plaster from a ceiling that had given up trying, curled leaves that had blown in through broken panes, the desiccated bodies of insects that had crawled in here to die. In the main room, a single armchair sat draped in a dusty white sheet, like a ghost waiting for company that would never arrive. A small cast-iron stove stood in the corner, rusted solid, its pipe disconnected and hanging at an angle. The kitchen was worse. The linoleum floor was peeling up in brittle curls, revealing rotted subflooring beneath. A fine layer of green mold coated the countertops. When I opened a cupboard, a mouse skittered out and disappeared into a hole in the wall, making my heart jump into my throat. This was not a home. It was a tomb. I walked through the two small bedrooms, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The feeling of despair was so thick it was hard to breathe. Every step revealed another problem, another failure, another reason why this place was beyond saving. Ms. Pennington had been wrong. There was nothing here worth fighting for, nothing worth 90 days of legal occupancy, nothing but rot and ruin, and the fading memory of someone I had never really known. I was about to turn and leave, to walk the 12 miles back to town and try my luck with the bus station floor, when something caught my eye. On the wall in the back bedroom, next to a window that looked out onto the overgrown hillside behind the house, there was a single clean square. The wallpaper around it was faded and water-stained, yellowed with age and damaged by moisture. But this one spot was brighter, newer, as if a picture had hung there for years, protecting the paper beneath from light and time. There was a small nail still in the wall. The head was slightly bent, as if something had been hung there recently and then removed. It was nothing, a minor detail in a house full of decay, but it was the only sign of deliberate care in the entire place. The only evidence that someone, at some point, had cherished something here, had chosen to protect it. Curiosity, or maybe just a desperate need to find one thing that was not broken, made me go to the window. I looked out at the backyard. It was a chaotic mess of weeds and thorny bushes sloping up into dense woods. The snow was falling heavier now, starting to cover the brown and gray with a thin layer of white. But as my eyes scanned the hillside, adjusting to the fading light, I saw something unnatural. A line, a straight horizontal line in the earth, about 30 feet up the slope from the back of the house. It was almost perfectly concealed by overgrown grass and tangled vines, barely visible under the fresh snow. But it was there. It looked like the top of a door frame, buried in the hillside. My heart gave a strange little flutter, a flutter that felt almost like hope, though I was afraid to call it that. It was probably nothing, an old retaining wall, a piece of forgotten junk, a trick of the light and the snow and my desperate imagination. But it was something. I went back outside. The cold air was a welcome shock after the stale, suffocating atmosphere of the house. My breath came out in white clouds as I circled around to the back and started climbing the slippery, leaf-strewn hill. As I got closer, pushing through frozen brambles that scratched at my hands, I saw that it was not just one line. There were two massive rusted metal plates, set side by side, almost flush with the hillside. They were cellar doors, storm doors, but they were not attached to the house. They were just here in the middle of the hill, hidden by years of overgrowth. A thick rusted chain was looped through two heavy iron handles and secured with a massive, ancient-looking padlock. I knelt down, my jeans immediately soaking up the damp cold from the ground, and pulled at the tangle of vines covering the doors. The metal beneath was cold and pitted with age. It looked like it had not been opened in a generation. Why would anyone build a cellar this far from the house? Why bury it in a hillside? Why lock it with a chain this thick? A new feeling began to push through the despair that had settled over me. It was fragile, tentative, barely more than a whisper. But it was there. Something was here. Something hidden. Something my grandmother had wanted to protect. I spent the next hour searching the dilapidated shed behind the house. It was a disaster of rust and neglect. Old tools with rotted handles, broken clay pots, bags of cement that had hardened into solid blocks years ago. In a cobweb-filled corner, behind a rusted wheelbarrow, I found what I was looking for. A heavy-duty bolt cutter. The handles were rusted, but when I worked them back and forth, they moved. The jaws were still sharp. I carried it back up the hill. The weight of the tool was reassuring in my hands. Solid, purposeful. The snow was falling steadily now, covering my tracks as I climbed. I positioned the jaws of the bolt cutter around one of the thick chain links. I braced my feet against the frozen ground and put all my weight into it. The metal groaned. I squeezed harder. My arms shook with the strain. My knuckles went white. My teeth clenched until my jaw ached. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then with a sudden, shockingly loud crack that echoed across the silent hillside, the link snapped. The chain fell away and clattered against the metal doors. I stood there breathing hard, my heart pounding. The sound had been so loud it seemed impossible that the whole world had not heard it, but the woods remained silent. The snow continued to fall. I was alone. The doors were free. I grabbed one of the iron handles. It was heavy, far heavier than I had expected. I braced my feet and pulled. Nothing. The door was sealed shut by years of rust and settled earth. I tried again, grunting with effort. My boots slipped on the wet leaves and fresh snow. Still nothing. Frustration welled up in me, hot and sharp. I had come this far, found this hidden thing, and now I could not even open it. I slumped down on the cold ground, my back against the immovable doors. The snow was soaking through my jeans, but I barely felt it. The despair was creeping back, whispering that I had been foolish to hope. Then I saw it, a long, sturdy piece of scrap metal lying near the shed. I must have walked past it 3 times without noticing. I scrambled back down the hill, my frozen fingers fumbling as I grabbed the metal bar. It was heavy, maybe 3 feet long, with a flattened end, a pry bar. I wedged the tip into the seam between the 2 doors and pushed down with all my body weight. The metal screeched in protest. A line of rust flaked away like dried blood. I did it again, and again. Slowly, agonizingly, a gap began to open between the doors. It was just a sliver at first, a thin line of darkness, but it was enough. I jammed the pry bar in deeper and heaved with everything I had. With a deep groaning shudder that seemed to come from the very bones of the hill, the door lifted, a few inches at first, then more. A puff of air escaped from the darkness within, and that air was different, cool and dry, not cold and damp like the house. It did not smell of rot or mold or decay. It smelled of earth and stone and something else, something like possibility. I worked the pry bar back and forth, widening the gap until I could get my fingers underneath the edge of the door. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and lifted. The door swung upward with surprising ease, its hinges finally overcoming the seal of rust in time. It settled open with a soft thud, revealing a set of steep concrete steps leading down into absolute blackness. I stood there for a moment, staring into the dark. Then I pulled out my cheap phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam was small and weak, but it cut a narrow cone through the darkness, revealing smooth poured concrete walls. Not rough, hewed stone like an old root cellar. Concrete, modern, built to last. My hand was shaking, but I took the first step down, then the next, then the next. The air grew cooler with each step, but not uncomfortably cold. It was the temperature of a basement, stable and insulated from the winter above. At the bottom of the stairs, maybe 12 feet down, I found myself facing a heavy steel door, a fire door, the kind you see in commercial buildings. It had a simple lever handle, slightly dulled by time but still solid. This was no root cellar, no storm shelter. This was something else entirely. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and pushed the lever down. The door swung inward without a sound. The hinges must have been oiled. Recently. I stepped across the threshold, sweeping the thin beam of my phone's flashlight across the space, and I froze. It was a single large room, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet. The walls were smooth, sealed concrete, painted a clean, pristine white that seemed to glow in the beam of my flashlight. The floor was polished concrete as well, smooth and level. It was bone dry, and it was clean, immaculately, impossibly clean. Not a speck of dust, not a cobweb, not a single sign of the decay that had consumed the house above. In the center of the room sat a sturdy wooden workbench, the kind you might find in a carpenter's shop. The wood was smooth, sanded by patient hands, darkened with age but well-maintained. On the far wall, built-in wooden shelves held neat rows of supplies, boxes of canned goods, jugs of water, first aid kits, blankets wrapped in plastic, tools still in their original packaging, hammers and saws and screwdrivers, never used. A small generator sat in one corner, a full fuel can beside it. In another corner was a simple cot, neatly made with clean white sheets and a thick wool blanket. And on the workbench, directly in the center of the room, sat a single small wooden box. It was a simple thing, handcrafted, made of dark, polished cherry wood. It had a small brass latch. tarnished with age but still functional. It was the only object in the entire room that looked personal, that looked old, that looked like it had been waiting for me. I walked toward it slowly, my footsteps silent on the smooth floor. The space felt sacred somehow, like a church, like a place of immense intention, immense effort, immense love. Someone had built this. Someone had stocked it. Someone had prepared for a day that might never come. I reached the workbench. The box was not locked. I lifted the small brass latch with trembling fingers. The lid opened with a soft click. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were three things. A stack of $100 bills, bound with a simple rubber band. The paper was crisp and clean, the bills still new. A small tarnished silver key on a thin chain, and a thick sealed envelope with a single word written on the front in shaky but elegant script. Cordelia. My breath caught in my chest. This was it. This was the reason. This was why she had built this place, hidden it from the world, protected it with chains and locks and years of silence. My grandmother had left this for me. I carefully lifted the envelope. It was heavy, full of pages. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. Inside were sheets of paper covered in that same delicate handwriting. The letters were uneven in places, written by hands that had grown old and unsteady, but the words themselves were clear. I sat down on the edge of the cot. I propped my phone against a can of beans on the shelf, angling the light so it fell across the pages. And I began to read. My dearest Cordelia, if you are reading this letter, then I am gone, and the world has failed you in the way I always feared it would. I am so sorry, more sorry than words can possibly express. I need you to understand that my absence from your life was never because I did not love you. It was never because I did not want you. The truth is much more complicated and much more painful. Your mother, my beautiful, troubled daughter, made choices I could never understand. She was determined to make her own way in the world, to prove that she did not need anyone. When she cut me out of her life, and out of yours and Margot's, it broke my heart in ways I still cannot fully describe. I tried to reach her. I wrote letters every month for 5 years. I made phone calls until she changed her number. I even drove to that apartment once, sat in my truck outside for 3 hours, trying to work up the courage to knock. But every letter was returned unopened. Every call went to voicemail messages that were never returned. And that day in the parking lot, I saw her through the window, saw how thin she had gotten, how tired she looked. And I knew that if I went up there, I would only make things worse. She had made her choice, her boundary, and as much as it destroyed me, I respected it. But I never ever stopped thinking about you. I started saving, just a little at a time. My pension was small, but I lived simply. I did not need much. And I bought this piece of land, this broken down house that nobody else wanted, and I started to build. The words blurred. I had to stop and wipe my eyes with the back of my hand. I had not cried when Ms. Pennington told me my grandmother was gone. I was crying now. I hired a man from the next town over, Emmett Holloway, to help me with the digging and the concrete. He is a good man, honest, keeps to himself. He never asked questions about what I was building or why, and I never offered answers. The rest I did myself. Every weekend for 10 years, Cordelia, I would drive out here early Saturday morning, before the sun came up, and work until Sunday night when it got too dark to see. I learned how to pour concrete from library books and YouTube videos. I learned how to wire electrical panels and install plumbing and seal walls against moisture. I made mistakes, a lot of them. I had to tear things out and start over more times than I can count. My hands are not as steady as they used to be. My back aches in ways I never knew possible. Some mornings I could barely get out of bed, and I would lie there thinking about how much easier it would be to just stop, to give up, to accept that I would never see my granddaughters again. But every time I wanted to quit, every time I wanted to surrender to the pain, I would think of you and Margot, of the granddaughters I was not allowed to know. And I would get up, and I would keep going. This place, this room, is the physical shape of my love for you. It is the home I could not give you in person, the safety I could not provide while I was alive, the proof that you were never, ever forgotten. I looked up from the letter. My eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in every detail with new understanding. The smooth white walls, perfectly level, the careful shelving, each board cut to exact measurements, the organized supplies rotated and maintained, the generator that had been tested and serviced, the cot that had been made fresh, a decade of Saturday mornings and Sunday evenings, a lifetime of devotion compressed into concrete and timber. I thought of the worn hands that had built these walls, the aching back that had carried each bag of cement up this hill, the determination that had kept her going year after year, weekend after weekend. The money beside me was next to the letter. I picked it up and counted it with shaking hands. $15,000, exactly enough to pay the taxes, with a few hundred to spare. I returned to the letter. The money should be enough to settle the debt with the county. It will give you a foothold, a chance to start. But it will not be easy, Cordelia. Nothing in this life ever is. The house above is a ruin. I know that. I never had the money or the strength to fix it while also building this place. I had to choose, and I chose this. I put all my energy, all my hope, all my love into this room, into these walls, into this sanctuary. This cellar is your foundation, your starting point. The rest you will have to build yourself. There was more. The letter continued for several more pages, filled with practical advice about the property, about the taxes, about the people in town who might help. Instructions for the generator. Notes about the supplies and when they would need to be replaced. Details that only someone who had thought of everything, who had spent years preparing for this moment, would have known to include. But then the tone shifted. The handwriting grew more urgent. There is something else you need to know, Cordelia. Something important. This land is not just dirt and trees. There is a spring on the northern edge of the property, a deep, clean source of water that flows year-round, even in the driest summers. A survey was done for the county years ago, and they tried to buy the land from me then. They said it was for a municipal well, but I investigated. I asked questions. I found out the truth. A large bottling company called Clearwater Development wants the water rights. They have been buying up land all around here, quietly through shell corporations and false names. They want to drain the spring, bottle the water, and sell it back to the world at a profit. They came to me once. A man in an expensive suit with a smile that never reached his eyes. He offered me more money than I had ever seen in my life. I turned him down, and they made me pay for that decision. The next page was harder to read. The handwriting was shakier, as if the memory itself caused pain. They spread rumors about me in town, said I was unstable, said I was hoarding weapons, preparing for some kind of apocalypse, that I was dangerous. People who had known me for decades suddenly would not meet my eyes in the grocery store. Friends I had coffee with every week stopped returning my calls. Neighbors who had waved at me for years started crossing the street when they saw me coming. I spent the last years of my life alone, Cordelia, isolated, cut off from everyone I had known, because I would not sell what was not theirs to take. I do not regret it, not for a moment, not for a single second, because this land, this water, it matters. It is one of the last clean sources in this entire region. The people in this town, they get their water from old wells that are starting to run dry, from municipal systems that are straining under the weight of drought and demand. If the company gets this spring, they will drain it, bottle it, ship it off to cities where people will pay $3 for something that should be free, and this town will be left with nothing. I lowered the letter. My grandmother had not just left me land and money. She had left me a fight, a purpose, a choice. I returned to the final page. They will come for you, Cordelia. They will come with lawyers and money and promises. They will offer you enough to set you and Margot up for life, anywhere you want to go. Enough to walk away from this place and never look back. You could take it. No one would blame you. After everything you have been through, after everything you have suffered, you deserve an easy life. You deserve to be safe and comfortable and free from struggle. But I want to ask you to consider another option. Keeping this land means a life of fighting. It means being poor when you could be rich. It means protecting something that is not just yours, that belongs to a whole community that might not even thank you for it. It means becoming the kind of person who chooses the hard right over the easy wrong. I cannot make this decision for you. It would not be right. It would not be fair. It has to be yours. That is the real inheritance, Cordelia. Not the land, not the money, not even this room. The choice, the chance to decide what kind of person you are going to be. Whatever you decide, know this. I loved you. I saw you, even from a distance, even through the wall your mother built between us, and I believed in the woman you would become. Your loving grandmother, Rosemary. I finished the letter and let the pages fall into my lap. For a long time, I sat there in the silent, clean white room, surrounded by the smell of earth and stone and a decade of hope. The flashlight on my phone cast strange shadows on the walls, making the space feel both larger and smaller than it was. And I wept. I cried for the grandmother I had never gotten to know, for the years she had spent building this place alone, driven by nothing but love and the desperate hope that someday I might need it. I cried for my mother, who had been so afraid of needing anyone that she had cut off the one person who had never stopped trying to help, who had built walls so high that even death could not breach them. I cried for Margot, still trapped in a system that saw her as a number, a file, a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. And I cried for myself, for the scared little girl I had been, for the terrified 18-year-old I was now, sitting in a hole in the ground, holding a choice that felt heavier than the whole world. The weight of it was crushing. Sell. Take the money. Get Margot. Get a real apartment in a real city with real heat and real safety. Give her the life she deserved. New clothes, good food, a school without metal detectors, and caseworkers watching her every move. Security, stability, peace. Was that not my only job? To protect her? To give her something better than what we had been given? Who cared about some spring in a town I had never seen? The world had never done a single thing for us. Why did we owe it anything? I could see the money. I could feel the weight of relief it would bring. A clean break, a new start, no history, no ghosts, no impossible choices. But then I looked around the room again. The neatly stacked cans, organized by type and expiration date, the carefully folded blankets still sealed in their plastic wrapping, the workbench worn smooth by years of patient labor, by hands that had grown old and tired but had never stopped believing. I thought of my grandmother driving out here alone every Saturday for a decade, teaching herself skills she had never needed, building something she might never see used, her back aching, her hands blistered, her heart breaking with every year that passed without word from her granddaughters. And still she kept going. Selling this place would not just be selling land and water. It would be selling this, her love, her sacrifice, her last desperate act of protection. It would be taking the one pure thing I had ever been given and putting a price tag on it. I thought about Margot. What would she want? Not the money. Not really. Margot had never cared about things. What she wanted was a home, a place where she felt safe, a place that was ours. She used to draw pictures constantly at the group home. Houses with gardens and tire swings, kitchens with tables big enough for a family, bedrooms with windows that looked out on fields instead of parking lots. Never mansions, never anything grand, just homes. Could this be that? A ruined house and a concrete bunker on a hill in the middle of nowhere? It was insane. It was impossible. The work would be immense. I had no skills, no experience, no idea what I was doing. I would have to fight a corporation that had already broken my grandmother. I would have to learn everything from scratch. I would probably fail. And even if I did not fail, I would be poor. I would struggle. I would have to fight for every single thing for the rest of my life. But I would be fighting for something real, something that mattered, something that was not just about surviving, but about living, about becoming the kind of person my grandmother believed I could be. My phone buzzed, making me jump so hard I nearly dropped it. It was a text from a number I did not recognize. This is Pennington. The 90-day notice of intent to seize was just posted on the property today. Clock is officially ticking. Also, a Mr. Preston Caldwell from Clearwater Development called my office this afternoon asking about the Ashford property's status. He said he would be in Havenwood next week and wanted to discuss options with the new owner. Be ready, Cordelia. They are not wasting any time. Clearwater Development, the bottling company. They were already moving, already circling. Suddenly, the choice did not feel like a philosophical exercise anymore. It felt like a battle line being drawn. I took a deep breath. The air in the bunker was still and cool. It felt solid, grounded, and I knew what I had to do. If you have made it this far into my story, I want to hear from you. Hit that subscribe button and leave me a comment below. Have you ever faced a choice that felt impossible? A moment when the easy path and the right path were not the same thing? What did you choose? And what did it cost you? Share your story. You might help someone else who is facing their own impossible decision right now. And stay with me, because the real fight is just beginning. The walk back to town took nearly 4 hours. By the time I reached the main street of Havenwood, the sun had fully risen, turning the snow-covered world into a blinding expanse of white. My feet were numb in my soaked shoes, and my hands had stopped hurting somewhere around mile 8, which I knew was not a good sign. But I barely felt any of it. In my pocket was $15,000 in cash. In my heart was a decision made, and in my mind was a countdown. 90 days. The town of Havenwood was small. One main street with a handful of storefronts, most of them closed for the winter or closed for good. A diner with a faded red awning and frost on its windows. A hardware store with tools displayed in a dusty window that looked like it had not been changed in years. A post office the size of a garden shed. A white-steepled Baptist church at the end of the street, its bell tower reaching toward the pale winter sky. It looked tired, but not defeated. The buildings were old, but someone was maintaining them. The sidewalks were cleared of snow. American flags hung limp in the cold air outside the post office. This was the town my grandmother had protected, the people she had chosen over money. I found the county tax office in the back of the small town hall, a brick building with white columns that had probably been standing since before anyone living had been born. The clerk was a stern-faced woman with gray hair pulled back tight and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked at me over the top of those glasses when I walked in, her eyes taking in my wet clothes, my tangled hair, my general appearance of someone who had spent the night in a bunker and then walked 12 miles through snow. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I am here to pay the back taxes on the Ashford property." I pulled the stack of bills from my pocket and set them on the counter between us. Her eyebrows rose, just slightly, the only crack in her professional composure. She counted the money 3 times, slowly, carefully, as if she expected it to disappear. Then she pulled out forms and stamps and made me sign things in triplicate. She typed information into an ancient computer that wheezed and hummed, like it might give up at any moment. Finally, she picked up a heavy stamp and brought it down on the final form with a satisfying thud. "The lien is removed," she said. Her voice was still flat, but there was something in her eyes, a hint of grudging respect. "The property is yours, Miss Ashford." Free and clear. Walking out of that office, I felt 10 feet tall. I had done it. The first step. The land was safe, but I knew the bigger fight was just beginning. I found a payphone outside the post office and used my last quarters to call the attorney, Ms. Pennington. "I paid the taxes," I said, before she could even finish her greeting. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You what?" Her professional composure cracked completely. "Cordelia, how? Where did you get $14,000? "My grandmother left some money. It was hidden on the property." Another pause. I could almost hear her recalculating everything she thought she knew about this case. "I see. Well, that changes things considerably." "I want to keep it," I said. The words came out in a rush, as if saying them slowly would make me lose my nerve. "I want to keep the land, and I want to get my sister. I want to be her legal guardian." The silence that followed was the longest yet. "Cordelia." Miss Pennington's voice was careful now, the way you speak to someone who might be about to do something very foolish. "That is an extremely difficult path. To gain custody, you will have to prove you can provide a stable home, a source of income, a safe environment. The court will not place a minor in a house that is uninhabitable. There will be inspections, interviews, psychological evaluations. They will fight you every step of the way. I know this could take a year, maybe more. And Clearwater Development is not going to sit back and wait while you figure things out. They will make your life very difficult. I know, I said again, but this is our home. I am going to make it work. She sighed. It was not a sigh of exasperation. It was the sigh of someone who had seen too much, hoped for too little, and was suddenly confronted with a spark of impossible defiance. All right, she said. Here is what you need to do. Establish residency immediately. Get a job. Any job. Start documenting every improvement you make to that property. Take photographs. Keep receipts. Create a paper trail that proves you are serious. I will start filing the preliminary paperwork for the guardianship petition. She paused. But Cordelia, do not expect miracles. This is going to be the hardest thing you have ever done. 1 year. Margot had to stay in that place for another year. The thought was a punch to the gut, but it did not break me. It hardened me. 1 year, 365 days. I would count every single one. What about the developer, I asked. This Preston Caldwell person. What do I do about him? Stall. Do not agree to anything. Do not sign anything. Just listen. Find out what they want and what they are willing to pay. Information is your only weapon right now. I will do that. And Cordelia, be careful. These people have resources you cannot imagine. They have been doing this a long time. Do not underestimate them. I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, watching my breath crystallize in the cold air. 1 year. I had 1 year to turn a ruin into a home, to find a job in a town where I knew nobody, to prepare for a fight with a corporation that had already destroyed my grandmother's reputation and left her to die alone. I looked down the main street at the small collection of buildings, the diner, the hardware store, the post office. This was my world now. I started walking. The hardware store was called Holloway's, spelled out in faded gold letters on a wooden sign that creaked in the wind. The window display was cluttered with tools and paint cans, and a handwritten sign advertising a sale on snow shovels. A bell chimed when I pushed open the door. The smell hit me immediately, sawdust and metal, and the faint chemical sharpness of paint. It was a good smell, a real smell, the smell of things being built. The man behind the counter was in his 60s, with weathered hands and shrewd eyes and the kind of stillness that comes from years of patient work. He looked up when I entered, taking in my appearance with a single quick glance that seemed to see everything. Can I help you? I am looking for a job. The words came out more desperate than I intended. He studied me for a long moment. His eyes lingered on my hands, which were red and raw from the cold, and scraped from the work I had done the night before. You are the Ashford girl, he said. It was not a question. Rosemary's granddaughter. Yes, sir, I paused. You knew her. Everybody knew Rosemary. His voice was gruff but not unkind. She bought a lot of supplies for me over the years. Cement, lumber, electrical wire. Never said what it was all for. I figured she was either building a bomb shelter or planning for the end of the world. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. Never did ask. Some things a person keeps to themselves. He came around the counter and stood in front of me, his arms crossed. You planning to fix up that place? Yes, sir, he grunted. It might have been a laugh. Show up tomorrow at 7. Do not be late. I will pay you minimum wage, cash, until we see how you work out. It was not much, but it was a start. Thank you, I said. Then because I had learned that information was power, I am Cordelia, but everyone calls me Cora. He nodded once. Emmett Holloway. And this is not charity, you understand. You work hard, you get paid, you slack off, you are gone. Clear? Clear. He turned back to his counter, picking up a catalog he had been reading. And Cora? My wife Lorraine makes more food than 2 old people can possibly eat. She will probably bring you dinner tomorrow, whether you want it or not. Do not be too proud to accept it. I walked out of that hardware store with my first job in a new town and the promise of a home-cooked meal. It was the first time in 3 years that I had felt like things might actually work out. The work was brutal. For the first month, I barely slept. I would wake before dawn in my grandmother's bunker, climb the hill to the ruined house above, and work until it was time to walk to town for my shift at Holloway's. I would work there until closing, learning everything Emmett would teach me. Then I would walk home in the dark and work on the house until I could not see anymore. The first task was the roof. I spent a week up there, balanced on a ladder that had seen better decades, patching holes with scraps of tin I bought from Emmett at cost. I covered everything with a massive blue tarp that I nailed down against the wind. It was ugly. It looked like a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. But when the next storm came, the water ran off instead of pouring through. Then I moved inside. I tore out the moldy drywall with my bare hands, wearing a mask that Emmett gave me after he heard me coughing one morning at the store. I ripped up the ruined linoleum and dragged it outside in heavy rolls. I scrubbed the walls and floors with bleach until my hands cracked and bled, then healed, then cracked again. Every evening I would retreat to the clean, quiet sanctuary of the bunker. It was my base of operations, my refuge, the only place in the world that felt truly safe. I would eat a simple meal from the supplies my grandmother had left: canned soup, crackers. Sometimes when Lorraine Holloway sent food home with Emmett, I would heat it on a small camp stove I had found in the shed and pretend I was sitting at a real table in a real kitchen. I would read a chapter of the home repair manual I had bought with my first paycheck, memorizing techniques I would try the next day. And I would fall asleep on the cot, exhausted but satisfied, surrounded by the white walls my grandmother had built with her own hands. The physical labor was grounding. With every swing of the hammer, with every board I tore out, I felt like I was clearing away not just the rot in the house, but something inside myself: the hopelessness, the fear, the feeling of being disposable. I was building something. I was choosing to build. A week into my work, a sleek black SUV crawled up my dirt road. I watched it from the porch, where I was wrestling with a stubborn section of railing. The vehicle looked completely out of place, too clean and too expensive for the rutted dirt track. It moved slowly, as if its driver was afraid of scratching the paint. A man got out. He was maybe 45, with graying hair and a navy suit that probably cost more than everything I owned combined. His shoes were leather, polished to a shine that immediately began collecting dust from my driveway. He looked at the house, at me in my work clothes with my hammer in my hand, and smiled a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Cordelia Ashford," he said, walking toward me with his hand extended. "Preston Caldwell, Clearwater Development. I believe my office contacted your attorney." I did not take his hand. "I know who you are." His smile flickered, just for a moment. Then it was back, wider and more practiced. "Miss Ashford, let me be direct with you. I respect that in business. This property is a wreck, a liability. You have got a house that is one stiff breeze from falling down, and land that is not worth much without significant investment." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We are prepared to make you a very generous offer. We will take this whole problem off your hands." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder with the Clearwater logo embossed on the front. $500,000. Cash. He said the number like it was a magic spell, like the words themselves had power to make me do whatever he wanted. And maybe they did. $500,000, $500,000. It was more money than I had ever dreamed of. More than my mother had earned in her entire life. More than I could earn in a decade of working at Holloway's. With that money, I could get Margot tomorrow. We could move anywhere: California, New York, anywhere with warmth and opportunity and future that did not involve frozen hands and aching backs. I could see it all, shimmering in front of me like a mirage in the desert. And then I thought of the letter. My grandmother, alone, driving out here every Saturday for a decade, teaching herself skills she had never needed, building something she might never see used, her back aching, her hands blistering, her heart breaking year after year. And still she kept going, because she believed I would need it, because she believed I was worth fighting for. "The property is not for sale," I said. Preston's smile tightened. The warmth drained out of his eyes, revealing something cold underneath. "Miss Ashford, let us be realistic here. What are you going to do with this place? Camp out in a collapsing house? You are 18 years old with no education, no skills, and no money. That $500,000 is more than you will ever see in your entire lifetime." He leaned closer. I could smell his cologne. Expensive. Cloying. "Take the win." I held his gaze. My answer has not changed. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I could see him recalculating, reassessing. He had expected a scared kid, an easy mark. He was seeing something else. "All right," he said finally. His voice had changed. The friendly salesman was gone, replaced by something harder. Something that had been there all along, hidden beneath the smile. "Let me be even more direct. We have ways of acquiring property, Miss Ashford. Legal ways. We can petition the county to declare this structure a blight. We can challenge your survey lines. We can tie you up in litigation until you cannot afford to eat, let alone pay a lawyer." He straightened his tie. "Or you can take the $500,000 and walk away. Rich. Free. No more struggling." He paused. "Think about it." He turned and walked back to his SUV. Before he got in, he looked back at me one more time. "We will be in touch, Miss Ashford. And do give my regards to your sister when you see her. It must be hard for her, being stuck in the system at 15. Such a vulnerable age." The door closed. The engine purred to life, and the SUV rolled away down the dirt road, leaving me standing on my broken porch with my heart pounding and my hands clenched into fists. He knew about Margot. He was threatening Margot. The fight had begun. I threw myself into the work with renewed fury. The days fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, work on the house, walk to town, work at Holloway's, walk home, work until dark, sleep, repeat. Emmett taught me more than I could have learned from any book. How to fix a leaky pipe without flooding the whole room. How to wire an outlet safely without electrocuting myself. How to look at a piece of wood and know if it was salvageable or rotten through. His wife, Lorraine, started appearing at the store every afternoon with containers of food. Beef stew thick with vegetables, chicken casserole with a golden crust, apple pie still warm from the oven, wrapped in towels to keep the heat. "You are too skinny," she would say, pressing the containers into my hands. "My grandmother taught me that the best way to love someone is to feed them. Now eat." I stopped arguing after the first week. The people of Havenwood were not sure what to make of me at first. The granddaughter nobody had ever seen, living in the ruin on the hill, working at Holloway's like she had something to prove. But slowly, gradually, the town began to accept me. The woman at the post office started saving the good magazines for me, the ones with articles about home repair and gardening. The man at the feed store offered me coffee when I came in looking for supplies, strong and black and hot enough to burn. The teenagers who worked at the diner would wave when I walked past on my way to work. It was not warmth exactly. Not yet, but it was acknowledgement, recognition, the first fragile threads of belonging. Then one night my phone rang. It was Margot, and she was crying. "Cora," she sobbed, the words tumbling out in gasps. "They took my drawings. All of them. The girls in Unit 9. They came into my room while I was at dinner, and they took everything, and they ripped them up and threw them in the trash. And Mr. Davies said there was nothing he could do because nobody saw anything. And I had been working on them for months, Cora. Months. I drew the house from your picture and the garden you described, and there was one of Mom that I spent forever on, and they just destroyed everything." She broke off, crying too hard to speak. I stood in the middle of the hardware store after closing, my whole body trembling with rage and helplessness. Margot, my baby sister, drawing pictures of home because she did not have one, creating beauty because her life had none. And those pictures, those fragile pieces of hope, had been destroyed just because someone could. Just because cruelty was free and kindness was expensive. I listened to her cry. I said all the things I could say. "It will be okay. I'm coming for you. I am building us a home." But then she said something that stopped my heart. "There is something else, Cora." She paused, trying to get her breathing under control. "There is a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield. They have been coming to the home for months, talking to the caseworkers. They want to adopt a teenager." "That is good," I said carefully. "Right? That is what the system is supposed to do." "They want to adopt me," Margot said. "Just me. They told the caseworkers they only want one child. They said they cannot handle two." The floor seemed to tilt underneath me. "They told me I would have my own room, my own bathroom, art lessons, private school. They said I would never have to worry about anything ever again. Margot, I told them no, she said. I told them I was waiting for you. But they keep coming back, and the caseworkers keep bringing it up. They keep saying what a wonderful opportunity it is. They said if I do not have a stable placement within the next year, they might have to move me to a different facility, somewhere farther away, somewhere that specializes in older kids who are harder to place. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I am scared, Cora. I do not want to lose you. I do not want to go to some other place where I do not know anyone. I want to come home. I want to come home to you. I closed my eyes. 1 year. I had 1 year to make this house a home, to prove to the state that I could provide for my sister, to fight off a corporation and a wealthy couple who could offer Margot everything I could not. 1 year. That night I could not sleep. I lay on the cot in the bunker, staring at the white ceiling, thinking about Margot's drawings. She had been creating art since she was old enough to hold a crayon. When we first arrived at the group home, she would draw constantly. It was the only thing that kept her sane. Houses with gardens and tire swings, kitchens with big tables surrounded by empty chairs waiting to be filled. Bedrooms with windows that looked out on fields and forests instead of parking lots and chain-link fences. Never mansions, never anything grand, just homes, safe places that existed only in her imagination. And those girls had taken that from her, had crumpled up her dreams and thrown them in the garbage like they meant nothing. I stared at the walls around me, at the shelves my grandmother had built, at the space that was clean and safe and waiting. I made a silent promise in the dark. One day, Margot would have a real studio, a place where no one could touch her art, a place where her dreams could take shape in peace. One day soon. Listen to me, Margot, I said. My voice was steady. I did not feel steady inside, but she did not need to know that. You will not lose me. Do you understand? Not ever. I am going to make this work. I am going to get you out of there, and we are going to live in our house on the hill, and nobody is ever going to take us apart again. You promise? I promise. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking, but my resolve was iron. Clearwater did not wait. 3 weeks after Preston's visit, I received an official letter from the county. A formal complaint had been filed regarding unsafe structures on my property. An inspector would be arriving within the week. I called Miss Pennington in a panic. They are trying to condemn the house, I said, to take it before I can fix it. I know, she said. Her voice was calm. She had clearly been expecting this. It is a common tactic. What is the current status of the repairs? I listed everything I had done. The roof, the floors, the mold removal, the new windows I had installed last week. My knuckles still scabbed from where the glass had slipped. Is it habitable? I hesitated. Almost. I need to finish the plumbing and get the heat working. Maybe 2 more weeks. You have 5 days. She paused. Cordelia, listen to me carefully. When the inspector comes, you need to be ready. Everything has to be up to code, or at least close enough that they cannot justify condemnation. Clearwater has connections in this county. They have been doing this for years, buying up properties by making them impossible to keep. Do not give them any ammunition. 5 days. I hung up the phone and ran to Holloway's. I need help, I said, the words tumbling out before Emmett could even look up from his workbench. I have 5 days before an inspector comes, and if the house is not ready, I lose everything. I know I do not have the money to pay for materials right now, but I will work it off. I will work double shifts for a year if I have to. I will do whatever it takes. Please. Emmett looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a set of keys. Take the truck, he said. I will load up what you need. Lorraine will help with the indoor work, and I will make some phone calls. You do not have to do this, I said. My voice was trembling. He grunted. Your grandmother helped a lot of people in this town, Cora. More than you know, more than she ever got credit for. This is not charity. This is paying back a debt. The next 5 days were a blur. Emmett appeared at my property every morning at 6, his truck loaded with materials. Lorraine came with him, directing operations like a general commanding troops. Word spread. By the second day, there were other people. The man from the feed store, whose name was Earl, and who turned out to be a retired plumber with 30 years of experience. A woman from the Baptist church named Gloria, who brought sandwiches and organized a cleaning crew of 6 church ladies who attacked the house with mops and bleach like they were going to war. 2 teenage boys who worked at the diner and wanted to earn extra cash and ended up working for free when they heard what was at stake. I watched, stunned, as my broken house became a community project. They fixed things I did not even know were broken. They cleaned corners I had not had time to reach. They brought paint and curtains and a kitchen table that Gloria said was just sitting in her garage collecting dust anyway. By the 4th day, the house had walls, real walls with fresh drywall and actual paint. The plumbing worked. The old cast iron stove had been replaced with a modern heating unit that Emmett had found at an estate sale 2 counties over. The porch no longer sagged. It was not beautiful, it was not finished, but it was habitable. The inspector came on the 5th day, a thin man with a clipboard and a permanent frown who walked through every room making notes and humming sounds that gave nothing away. I stood in the doorway, my heart in my throat, watching him examine everything. Finally, he turned to me. "This property has been flagged for potential condemnation," he said. His voice was flat, official. "However, based on my inspection today, I cannot justify that assessment. The structure is stable. The basic systems are functional. There are areas that need improvement, but nothing that constitutes an immediate danger to the occupant." He handed me a yellow copy of his report. "You pass, Miss Ashford. For now." I waited until his car had disappeared down the road. Then I sat down on my new porch, put my head in my hands and sobbed. The people who had helped me gathered around. Emmett put a rough hand on my shoulder. Lorraine pressed a cup of coffee into my hands. Gloria was already talking about what needed to be done next week. And for the first time in my life, I understood what my grandmother had tried to tell me in her letter. This was not just about land or water or money. This was about community, about choosing to stand with people even when it was hard, about building something bigger than yourself. That evening, I walked to the northern edge of my property. The spring was there, just as my grandmother had described. A small clearing surrounded by old-growth ferns, their fronds brown and curled with winter, but still beautiful. Water welling up from a fissure in dark rock, so clear it was almost invisible, trickling down to form a small, pristine creek that wound its way through the woods. I knelt and cupped my hands. The water was so cold it burned, and so pure it tasted like nothing at all, like drinking winter itself. This was what Clearwater wanted. This was what my grandmother had died protecting, and now it was mine to protect. That night, Emmett and Lorraine invited me to dinner at their house, a small farmhouse just outside of town, warm and cluttered and full of the smell of pot roast and fresh bread. After dinner, when Lorraine was washing dishes and humming to herself in the kitchen, Emmett leaned back in his chair and looked at me with something heavy in his eyes. "There is something you should know, Cora, about your grandmother, about Clearwater." He paused, gathering his thoughts. 20 years ago, Preston Caldwell's father came to this town, Harrison Caldwell. He was smooth, polished, had a lot of money and a lot of promises. He started buying up land all around here, talking about economic development and jobs and prosperity for everyone. Emmett shook his head. Rosemary was one of the first to figure out what he really wanted. Not the town's prosperity, just the water. He did not care about the people who lived here. He just wanted to drain our aquifer and sell it back to us in plastic bottles. "She refused to sell," I said. "She did more than refuse. She organized, got people to pay attention, wrote letters to the county, to the state, to newspapers. For a while, she had enough support to stop him completely." Emmett's face darkened. But Harrison Caldwell was not the kind of man who accepted defeat. When he could not buy her land, he decided to destroy her instead. He started spreading rumors, said she was unstable, said she was stockpiling weapons, that she was dangerous, that she was planning something terrible. People who had known her for decades suddenly started looking at her differently. Friends stopped coming around. Neighbors who had waved at her for 20 years started crossing the street when they saw her. She spent the last years of her life alone, Cora, isolated, cut off from everyone she knew and loved, because she would not sell what was not his to take. I stared at him. And nobody helped her? Emmett looked away. When he spoke again, His voice was rough with something that might have been shame. We should have. I should have. But Harrison had money, and he had influence. And it was easier to believe the rumors than to fight him. Easier to look away than to stand up. He met my eyes. I have regretted that every day since, Cora. Your grandmother was the best person I ever knew. She deserved so much better than what we gave her. And I will be damned if I let the same thing happen to you. Lorraine came in from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. She sat down next to her husband and took my hand. We are with you, honey, she said. Whatever comes next, you are not alone anymore. Walking home that night, I looked up at the sky. It was clear for the first time in weeks, and the stars were out. Thousands of them. Millions. More than I had ever seen in my life, because I had never lived anywhere dark enough to see them properly. My grandmother had looked at these same stars. She had walked this same road. She had fought this same fight, and she had lost. But maybe, just maybe, I would not have to. My phone rang. It was Preston Caldwell. Miss Ashford, his voice was smooth, pleasant, as if we were old friends catching up. I have been thinking about our last conversation. Perhaps I was too aggressive. Let me make a new offer. $1 million. Cash. For the land, the water rights, and your silence. 1 million. I thought about everything I could do with that money, everything I could give Margot, every struggle I could avoid. Then I thought of my grandmother, building her bunker alone, carrying bags of cement up the hill, learning to pour concrete from library books and YouTube videos, her back aching, her hands blistered, her heart breaking. And still she kept going, because she believed this land was worth protecting, because she believed I was worth believing in. This property will never belong to Clearwater, I said. Not for any price. A long pause. You are making a very serious mistake, Miss Ashford. We will be in touch. He hung up, and I stood there in the dark, under a sky full of stars, and felt absolutely certain that I had made the right choice. If this story is speaking to you, if you have ever had to stand your ground when everything and everyone was telling you to walk away, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment below, subscribe to this channel, share your story with this community, because sometimes just knowing that other people have faced the same impossible choices, that other people have found the strength to keep fighting, can make all the difference in the world. And stay with me, because the hardest part is still to come. The morning of the inspection, I woke before dawn. Not that I had really slept. I had spent most of the night lying on the cot in the bunker, staring at the white ceiling, running through every possible scenario in my head until they blurred together into a single mass of anxiety. Mrs. Bellamy was coming today, a senior caseworker from the state's child welfare department, the woman who would decide whether I was fit to be Margot's legal guardian. I had spent the last 11 months preparing for this moment. The house was transformed. Not beautiful, not finished, but solid and clean and safe. Real walls with fresh paint in soft, warm colors. Windows that opened and closed properly and let in the morning light. A kitchen with a working stove and a refrigerator that hummed quietly in the corner, and a table where two people could sit and share a meal. Margot's room was ready. I had painted it myself, a soft lavender color that Lorraine had helped me pick out after I described Margot's favorite things. There was a bed with clean white sheets and a thick quilt that Gloria from the church had made by hand. A desk by the window positioned to catch the best light for drawing. A bookshelf I had built myself, following instructions from one of Emmett's old carpentry books. In the corner, I had set up an easel, brand new, still wrapped in plastic. Beside it, a desk with drawers I had filled with supplies, charcoal pencils, watercolors, thick paper that would not buckle under wet paint, brushes of every size still in their packaging, waiting for her hands. On the easel, I had pinned a single photograph, the only picture of our grandmother I had found, tucked into the safe deposit box at the bank with the silver key. An old woman with flour on her weathered hands, standing in front of a garden full of herbs, smiling at someone outside the frame, smiling at us maybe, smiling at the future she hoped we would have. Everything was ready, everything except me. I got dressed in the nicest clothes I own, a simple navy dress that Lorraine had found at a thrift store in Millbrook. I brushed my hair until it shone and looked at myself in the small mirror I had hung by the door. The face that looked back at me was older than the one I remembered from the group home, thinner from months of hard labor and missed meals, but also stronger. There were calluses on my hands now, and a steadiness in my eyes that had not been there a year ago. I had worked for this. Every single day for nearly 12 months, I had worked for this moment. I walked up the hill from the bunker and stood on the porch watching the road. At exactly 9 o'clock, a gray sedan appeared at the end of my driveway. Mrs. Bellamy was a small woman with silver hair cut short and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She carried a clipboard like a weapon and moved with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this exact thing 1,000 times before. "Miss Ashford," she said, not offering to shake hands, "I am here to conduct the final home inspection for your guardianship petition. Please come in," I said. She walked through every room of the house. She opened every closet, every cupboard, every drawer. She checked the locks on the windows and the seals on the doors. She ran the water in every sink, flushed every toilet, turned on every light. She made notes, constantly, in tiny, precise handwriting that I could not read from where I stood watching. "You have made significant improvements to this property," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "Yes, ma'am. The county records show this house was flagged for potential condemnation less than a year ago." She looked at me over her glasses. "You brought it back from that?" "I had help." She made another note. "Show me where you sleep." I hesitated for just a moment. This was the part I had been dreading, the part that could make or break everything. "This way," I said. "It is outside." I led her out the back door and up the hill. Her sensible shoes slipped a little on the grass, still wet with morning dew, but she did not complain. When we reached the cellar doors, she stopped. "What is this?" "It is where I have been living for the past year, while I fix the house. It is also where I sleep now." I opened the doors and led her down the concrete stairs. At the bottom, I pushed open the steel door and stepped aside. Mrs. Bellamy walked into the bunker. She stood frozen in the center of the room, her eyes moving across every surface, taking in each detail as if memorizing a sacred space. For a long moment, she did not say anything. She looked at the pristine white walls, the handmade shelves, each board cut to exact measurements, the carefully organized supplies, the workbench worn smooth by years of patient labor, the cot where I had slept for almost a year, neatly made with clean sheets, and the wool blanket my grandmother had left. She looked at the corner I had prepared as an art studio for Margot, the second easel, the desk with its drawers full of supplies, the photograph of our grandmother pinned where Margot would see it every time she sat down to draw. "Your grandmother built this," she said finally. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am. She spent 10 years building it." 10 years? Every weekend. By herself. She learned how to pour concrete and wire electricity and seal walls against moisture. She never told anyone what she was doing. She just kept building, year after year, because she believed that someday we would need it. Mrs. Bellamy was quiet for a long time. When she turned to look at me, there was something different in her eyes. The professional distance was still there, but behind it was something else. Something that looked almost like wonder. "Miss Ashford," she said slowly, "in 23 years of doing this job, I have never seen anything like this." She took off her glasses and cleaned them on her sleeve. When she put them back on, her voice was softer. "I will submit my report tomorrow." Then she walked back up the stairs and out into the daylight without another word. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I went to work at Holloway's every day. I cooked dinner in my new kitchen every night. I read books in the bunker and wrote letters to Margot that I could not afford to mail. I did all the normal things that normal people do, but inside I was screaming. Every time my phone rang, my heart stopped. Every time I saw an unfamiliar car on the road, I wondered if it was someone coming to deliver news that would change my life. And then finally the call came. It was Ms. Pennington, Cordelia. Her voice was strange, tight, controlled. I just heard from the court. I could not breathe. I could not speak. I could not do anything but stand there in the middle of the hardware store, clutching my phone like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to the earth. "The judge signed the order this morning. Full guardianship, effective immediately. You can go get your sister." I dropped the phone. It clattered on the wooden floor of the hardware store. I stood there staring at it, unable to comprehend what I had just heard. Emmett came around the counter and crouched beside me. Cora? Cora, what happened? What is wrong? I picked up the phone with shaking hands. What? I managed to whisper. You won, Cordelia. Miss Pennington's voice was warm now, all the professional distance gone. She is yours. Mrs. Bellamy's report was... She paused and I could hear her voice catch. She called it the most compelling evidence of familial love she had ever seen in her entire career. The judge did not even hesitate. I slid down the wall of the hardware store and sat on the dusty floor. Emmett was crouching beside me, his weathered face creased with concern. Cora? What is it? I got her, I whispered. I got Margot. She is coming home. The drive to the group home took 4 hours. Emmett insisted on letting me borrow his truck. Lorraine packed a cooler with sandwiches and juice and 3 different kinds of cookies because she could not decide which one Margot might like best. I drove too fast. I knew I was driving too fast, but I could not help it. The building looked exactly the same as it had a year ago, when I had walked out with a trash bag containing everything I owned. The same cracked concrete steps, the same faded brick, the same windows with their permanent film of institutional despair. But this time, I was not walking out. I was walking in, as a guardian, as family. The woman at the front desk looked at my paperwork 3 times before she believed it was real. Then she made a phone call, and another phone call, and finally nodded toward the common room. She is waiting for you. I walked down the hallway, past Unit 7, past the bathroom where I used to hide when things got too loud and too scary, past the common room with its blaring television and its smell of institutional cleaning supplies. And there she was. Margot was standing in the lobby, holding a single black trash bag. Her hair was longer than I remembered, falling past her shoulders now. Her face was thinner. She looked like she had aged years in the 12 months we had been apart. But when she saw me, her whole face transformed. We did not speak. We just ran. We crashed into each other in the middle of that institutional lobby, with its fluorescent lights and its scuffed linoleum floor. And we held on like we would never, ever let go. I could feel her shaking. I could feel my own tears soaking into her hair. I could feel her heart beating against mine. The same rhythm it had beaten when we were little girls sharing a bed in our mother's apartment, trying to sleep through the sounds of her coughing in the next room. You came, she whispered. You actually came. I told you I would, I said. I promised. We stood there for a long time. Long enough that a caseworker cleared her throat awkwardly and asked if we needed anything. We need to go home, I said. The drive back was quiet. Margot sat in the passenger seat, watching the world go by with wide eyes. The city gave way to suburbs, then to farmland, then to the wild hills of Montana with their pine forests and their snow-capped peaks in the distance. Tell me about the house, she said. So I did. I told her about the property, about the spring, about our grandmother's letter. I told her about Emmett and Lorraine and the people of Havenwood who had helped me when I had nothing and no one. I told her about Preston Caldwell and Clearwater and the fight that was still ongoing, and I told her about the bunker. She turned to look at me, her gray eyes wide. A bunker? Like underground? Like underground. And she built it for us? She spent every weekend for a decade building it, teaching herself skills she had never needed, carrying bags of cement up the hill, pouring concrete and wiring electricity and sealing walls, all because she believed that someday we would need a safe place to land. Margot was quiet for a long moment, watching the trees flash past outside the window. I wish I could have met her, she said finally. Me too. We drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. When we finally pulled up to the house, the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. The last light of day caught the windows and made them glow like warm embers. Margot got out of the truck and stood there, looking. It is. She stopped. Started again. It is real. It is ours, I said. I showed her the house first, her room with its lavender walls and the easel waiting in the corner, the kitchen where I had learned to cook simple meals from Lorraine's patient instruction, the living room with its second-hand furniture and the fireplace that I had learned to use on cold winter nights. She touched everything, ran her fingers along the walls, the countertops, the window frames, as if she needed to prove to herself that it was solid, that it would not vanish like a dream when she woke up. Then I took her outside. The cellar doors were open, waiting. "What is that?" she asked. "That is where I have been living. Where we can live together now if you want. There is something inside I need you to see." We walked down the stairs together. Margot crossed the threshold and went completely still. The bunker seemed to hold its breath around her. I watched her gaze travel from the pristine white walls to the handmade shelves, from the workbench worn smooth by patient hands to the cot where I had slept for almost a year. She was not just looking, she was understanding. Then she saw the corner I had prepared for her, the easel by the wall, angled to catch the light from a lamp I had positioned just right, the desk with drawers full of supplies, charcoal pencils, watercolors, thick paper that would not buckle under wet paint, brushes of every size still in their packaging, waiting for her hands. On the easel, I had pinned the photograph of our grandmother. Margot walked toward it like someone approaching an altar. She reached out and touched the photograph with trembling fingers, touched the face of the woman who had built this place for granddaughters she was never allowed to meet. "Cora," her voice broke. "She did this. She built all of this. For us. For us," I said, "because she loved us, even though she never got to know us. Even though Mom kept her away, she never stopped loving us." Margot sank down onto the small stool I had placed beside the easel. She was crying now, tears streaming down her thin face. "I spent a year drawing pictures of houses," she whispered, "imaginary homes that did not exist. And the whole time she was building a real one, a real home, for us." She looked around the room one more time, at the white walls, at the careful shelving, at the decade of love made manifest in concrete and wood, and she was alone the whole time. Nobody helped her. Nobody even knew. I knelt beside her and took her hand. "She was not alone," I said. "She had us. She was thinking about us every single day. Every weekend when she came out here to work, she was thinking about this moment, about you sitting here, about us being safe." Margot squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. "I will never let anyone take this from us," she said. "Never. I know you will not." We sat there together in the bunker our grandmother had built, surrounded by her love, and for the first time since our mother died, we were truly home. 1 year later, the house on the hill is almost unrecognizable now. The clapboard siding gleams with fresh white paint, bright against the green of summer. The porch stretches across the entire front of the house, wide and welcoming, with a wooden swing where Margot and I sit in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The garden is thriving, vegetables in neat rows, the same herbs our grandmother used to grow in her clay pots, flowers spilling out of window boxes in riots of color. Inside, the house is warm and full of life. Margot's artwork covers nearly every wall, paintings of the landscape, of the spring, of the house itself at different times of day. A portrait of our grandmother, drawn from the single photograph, her flower-dusted hands and her gentle smile rendered in soft charcoal. And in the bunker, in the corner that was always meant for her, Margot has created a studio that would make any artist proud. The walls are covered with her work, not the sad, lonely houses she used to draw in the group home. These paintings are full of color and light and hope, fields of wildflowers, sunsets over mountains. Our little house with smoke curling from its chimney and 2 figures sitting on the porch swing. I started my own business 6 months ago, handyman services, specializing in home repair. Emmett taught me everything I know, and when he retired last spring, he sold me his truck at a price I could afford. Now people all over Havenwood call me when their pipes leak or their doors stick or their fences fall down. It is not much money, but it is honest work, and it is mine. Clearwater Development has not given up. They filed 3 more complaints with the county, all of which were dismissed. They offered me $2 million last month, hand-delivered by Preston Caldwell himself, who drove up my driveway in his black SUV like he owned the place. I said no. Ms. Pennington helped me file a conservation easement on the spring. It will take years to work its way through the legal system, but when it does, the water will be protected forever. No corporation will ever be able to drain it or bottle it or sell it to the highest bidder. The fight is not over. Maybe it never will be, but we fight from a position of strength now. We fight from home. Sometimes late at night, I go down to the bunker by myself. I sit at the workbench my grandmother built, running my hands along the smooth wood worn by years of her patient labor. I read her letter again, though I have memorized every word by now, and I talk to her. I tell her about Margot's latest paintings, about the friends we have made in town, about the spring in the garden and the porch swing where we watch the stars come out. I tell her that I understand now, that I finally understand what she was trying to give us. Not land, not money, not even this room, as beautiful and safe as it is. She gave us a choice. The choice to become people who stand up for what matters, who protect things that are worth protecting, who choose the hard right over the easy wrong. That is the real inheritance. Not what she left us, but who she challenged us to become. I close my eyes and lean back against the cool concrete wall. The bunker is quiet, safe. The air smells of earth and stone and possibility. Home, I have learned, is not just four walls and a roof. Home is a foundation. It is a place where you are safe enough to grow, to heal, to become who you are meant to be. For me and Margot, that place was a hidden cellar in a hillside, a hole in the ground filled with a grandmother's love, and it saved us. It truly, truly did. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. If it touched something in your heart, if it reminded you of your own struggles, or your own impossible choices, or your own journey home, I would be honored if you would hit that subscribe button. But more than that, I want to hear from you. Have you ever found family in an unexpected place? Have you ever had to fight for something that mattered, even when it would have been easier to walk away? Have you ever received a gift from someone who never got to see you open it? Leave a comment below. Share your story, because this is how we find each other. This is how we discover that we are not alone in our struggles, that other people have walked these same hard roads and come out the other side. In this community, we believe in second chances. We believe in building something worth protecting. We believe that love can outlast death, that hope can outlast despair, and that home is something we carry inside us even when we have nowhere else to go. Thank you for being part of my story, and thank you for sharing yours. Until next time.